President. I appreciate the opportunity. I do want to clarify a couple of things. I don't want this to be a tit for tat and try to argue, but I do think that with all due respect to the majority leader, who I really do respect, and he does a lot to help his constituents, with all due respect, when it comes to dealing with policy, we have to be sitting at these desks. And I believe that that's what Senator Mesnard was referring to, that if we want to deal with the policy at some time in the future, we can't do it if we're not in session. We have to be sitting at these desks. So, notwithstanding all the other good that can be done outside of this particular building, we can't do that unless you're Lupe Contreras sitting at home in your pajamas. Do it unless we're sitting at these desks. With that, Madam President, I would like to, I'm not going to focus on what the others have said, although I agree with much of what my colleagues have said about opening the state. I have been a strong advocate behind the scenes, trying to work on it, and I think that it's a mistake not to open up the state faster. I believe the destruction that's coming is far greater than what we're going to face in the next few weeks or even months of COVID-19. I want to tell just a very quick story to kind of make a point. I didn't research this. This is from reading a long time ago, so my facts may be off a little bit. But I want to make the point because when I read this years ago, it stood out to me what the spirit of America is, and certainly the spirit of Arizona. And back in the Revolutionary War, there was a Colonel von Steuben. There was a Prussian army officer, and he was recruited by George Washington to come and train the colonials that at that time were still a ragtag group of individuals, and they were unruly. They used their bayonets to stir the soup that they had, other things like that. Colonel von Steuben came in and he created a manual, and he tried to force in true military style compliance without really explaining why these policies were in place. And he didn't get anywhere because the spirit of America was, don't tell me what to do, I'm going to do whatever I want. So as he was pondering, the thought came to him that he needs to train. And so he did, and I won't bore you with all the details, but he set up leadership and structure, and he trained why these things were important. And then they went back and trained their groups, and what happened was he got willing compliance. And this ragtag group of colonials turned it into a very strong, well-trained army. Now, what does that have to do with what we're talking about today? From my perspective, COVID-19 certainly has some unique qualities, and we have tried to address them. I give kudos to the governor who has tried to walk a fine line, and I'm grateful for the fact that he was light-handed when he first came out with the stay-at-home order. And essentially the way I took it was, yes, this is an executive order. Whether it's constitutional or not, I'm going to leave that aside. But he encouraged people to stay home if they didn't have to go out for essential items. But he also encouraged people to go out and do things that would keep them healthy. Go out and walk, go out and exercise, do the things you need to do, just practice social distancing. Be smart about it. Because why? The original purpose was to flatten the curve. And why were we supposed to flatten the curve? Because there was a concern that we would overwhelm the hospital and medical system. I appreciated Governor Ducey coming out and saying that. And I think, much like the story I just told, because he explained the reason why, the citizens of Arizona willingly complied. I know that I did. You see, I'm not wearing a mask today. I have no personal fear of COVID-19. It's part of life. If I were to get sick, I get sick. But when I go out and I go to stores, I wear a mask and I wear gloves. Why? Because I'm trying to be a good citizen. So I voluntarily chose to do that. Now, my concern is, Madam President, that we have businesses and individuals who have made decisions because they're in extreme cases. My colleague, Mr. Livingston, mentioned that we have at this point, to the best of our knowledge, 15% unemployment, not including those that are underemployed or have part-time jobs. That number is going to continue to climb. Through most of the Great Depression, our unemployment was probably around that number. It peaked, I believe, somewhere around 20, 24, 25. But for most of the Depression, it was around 15, 16%. We have numbers that are similar to the Great Depression. And I will tell you, contrary to what some of the economists are saying, that we're going to have a V recovery, I don't believe that for a second. But that doesn't mean that we can't overcome this. Here's the concern I have. I'm not saying this to throw anybody under the bus, but I think that the perception of encouraging Arizonans to socially distance and to be smart about how they interact changed markedly about 2 weeks ago, when for the first time the penalties that exist in the law were brought up and effectively people felt threatened. Now, we've seen that across the country. We haven't seen it in Arizona up until recently, but we've seen the effect of that. In Texas, there was a mom who was trying to feed her kids. She's a small business owner, and she opened up her salon so that she could feed her children and the people who worked for her could feed their children. And what happened? She was arrested because she was trying to make a living. The judge says, well, if you apologize and you promise not to open again and you promise to be good, a good subject, then I'll forgive it. She said, I can't. I can't in good conscience do that because then we can't feed our children. That's the number one priority for me. So what happened? She was sentenced to 7 days in jail. The outcry that came from that was remarkable. I think the last number I saw was that in a GoFundMe account, she had $500,000 pledged for her defense. Even the lieutenant governor offered to pay the entire, and I think he did, paid the $7,000 fine that she was levied, and offered to be in home arrest for the 7 days so that she could be with her children. That's just one story, and that's in a relatively conservative area, under a relatively conservative executive order. But the heavy hand of government came crashing down on that mother because she had the audacity to make a living to feed her children. Now, what does that have to do with Arizona? What it has to do with Arizona is that we now have threats of using 26317, which is a Class 1 misdemeanor, $2,500, and up to six months in jail. Losing licenses. And if you don't believe that there are people in government that would strip somebody of their license for simply trying to make a living, then you haven't been paying attention. So what this all comes down to for me, Madam President, is this. We have a partial reopening, and for that I'm grateful. I don't think it's fast enough, but I'm not here to argue that point. Others have argued that point. I support it. I'm not here to argue that point. What I'm here to argue is, under the executive orders that we have, there is certainly going to be examples of noncompliance. Not because someone is trying to be a malfeasant, but because they are simply trying to protect their business and their property and their families and their ability to make a living to feed their kids. Because guess what? We don't have the money to take care of everybody. And we probably have destroyed the dollar by printing $10 trillion. Be aware of that. What we have to do, in my opinion, is we can't leave until we put together some legislation, which you know I've worked on. It was referenced earlier, the Eddie bill or whatever it was referred to. I only want that moniker if it's a good bill. If it's a bad bill, then I want you to say it's the Leach bill. But notwithstanding possible imperfections that need to be tweaked, the concept is valid. To recognize that there are those people who have whether intentionally or unintentionally, violated these stay-at-home orders. I'm not talking about those that are out committing crimes. I'm talking about somebody who's gone to open a business or to work or something to support their family. We're going to have, as we open up, people that are going to file lawsuits because they're going to go into a store or into a restaurant or into a salon or into any other business, and 2 weeks later they're going to have COVID-19 because folks understand This is not simply going to go away because we're sitting at home. Look at what's gone on with everybody under lockdown in all the states. So it's going to happen. And what will happen is there will be lawsuits claiming that because they were in a restaurant and for some reason people weren't 6 feet apart, they got COVID-19 and that restaurant is liable. That is very real, and that's going to happen. So what I'm suggesting, Madam President, is that we don't sine die until we have some kind of protections in place for individuals and businesses and churches and charitable organizations, etc., that we can protect them against those types of very simple and negligent suits. I'm not talking about immunity. You people all know how I feel about immunity. It's a very rare time when I think immunity is appropriate. I'm talking about creating a temporary higher standard, as we have done in other cases, and giving some protection to individuals, to businesses, to churches, to charitable organizations, and having something like a gross negligence standard. So if somebody is being grossly negligent, a doctor doesn't clean the tools between patients, well, that's obviously grossly negligent. But having two patients sitting next to each other talking, is that the doctor's liability? I would say no, but I will suggest to you that that's coming. Those suits are going to come. So I don't understand why we would put off until some undetermined future date these protections after harm has been caused and damage has been caused and penalties have been meted out. I don't know why we would postpone that instead of coming together in the next couple of days, pass a bill like I've suggested, create protections, and then if you want to sine die, we've done something to protect the people of Arizona. I don't particularly care about all the bills that are out there, and this is just me talking for me. I don't care about the bills that are out there, even though I have a fabulous bill, probably the best bill ever seen in the legislature, in the history of the legislature. But I'm willing to forego that to give up all of Senator Livingston's bad bills. Madam President, I'm joking, but I don't make light of the fact that COVID-19 is real. I'm not suggesting it's not. I'm suggesting that life is also real. Having to make a living, having to feed your family, having to make sure your business doesn't collapse. Because we cannot take care of everybody. That is just not a possibility, nor do we have the right to. And people have a right to defend their business and to make a living and to support their children. So that's all I'm suggesting, Madam President. Let's get something like that out so that we can protect Arizonans that are doing good things for good reasons, even if technically they may be outside of the compliance. And with that, Madam President, I would implore you that we don't sine die, but we create some kind of protection. Thank you for the time.
Thank you, sir.